Kristi Noem had a U.S. senator thrown to the ground and detained, and yet somehow Pete Hegseth is the worst cabinet secretary this week because a new leak, yes, a new leak has come out of the Pentagon showing just exactly how much of a disaster he is, even in the eyes of his own staff. So bad, in fact, that there are tears being shed at the Pentagon. We're going to get into it all, but before we do, if I could quickly ask you to leave a like on this video, and if you haven't already and you enjoy our channel, to hit that subscribe button. It goes a long way in supporting the work that we are doing on this show. Now, before we get into this latest leak and report out of the Pentagon about Pete Hegseth, I want to start with what spurred it on, his incompetence called out by Mikey Sherrill before Congress, and this clip right here.
I have to say, your training at Fox News has let you spin months of dangerous dysfunction and incompetence into catchy phrases like restoring the warrior ethos and increasing lethality. But the truth is, it's really been chaos at the Pentagon under your leadership. You've clearly shown you're unable to manage the Department of Defense, but what I'm most concerned about are three specific areas: your operational incompetence, your managerial incompetence, and your budgetary incompetence. So let's start with operational. According to news reports, in your first week on the job, you got confused in a National Security Council meeting and thought President Trump wanted you to stop all aid to Ukraine. In a well-functioning administration, you would have asked for clarification before making that seismic policy shift, but instead you ordered vital military aid heading to the front lines turned around, costing the U.S. millions of dollars, and depriving Ukrainian soldiers of equipment they needed to fight Russia. So, Mr. Secretary, can you explain how exactly you misunderstood such a monumental presidential order?
One of many fake news headlines we've dealt with.
So, President Trump told you to halt military aid to Ukraine on January 30th?
As is often the case, highly ideological and very ill-informed reporters love to speculate about things they know nothing about in order to spear President Trump and myself.
So it sounds like actually the reporting is correct, because I will say, if it wasn't a mistake, why did aid restart only a few days later?
Again, we would take complete issue with what would some call reporting and others call a hatchet job.
So why did aid start just a couple days later?
I'm saying the reporting is inaccurate, ma'am.
I don't think that's correct. So let's move on to your managerial incompetence. I think we can see why you misunderstood the president, because you're obviously misunderstanding my questions. Less than a month into the job, you fired the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, C.Q. Brown, and the chief of naval operations, Lisa Franchetti, without cause. And to this day, you still have not provided an adequate explanation for removing them. As far as I can tell, you fired C.Q. Brown because he was black and Lisa Franchetti because she is a woman. So nearly 4 months later, we still don't have a new nominee for Chief of Naval Operations. News reports, and you can contest it, but I'd love to hear your answer, say that you haven't nominated someone because qualified admirals keep turning the position down. So tell me, Mr. Secretary, when will Congress receive your nomination for the next chairman of the next chief of naval operations?
Ma'am, with all due respect, I would suggest not believing every headline you read.
With all due respect, I'd like your nomination. When will we see it?
There is not a single admiral or any military official has turned down a position that's been
So when will we see your nominee for the chief of naval operations?
In due time, for all the right reasons.
Again, I think we've seen the managerial incompetence. Okay, let's move on to budgetary incompetence. You missed the deadline to submit a draft defense budget to Congress, which makes it impossible for us to complete our work on the NDAA or appropriations, and makes it more likely you'll receive delays in funding you need for new acquisitions, programs, and other priorities.
Pete Hegseth is perhaps the most incompetent and least qualified person in Donald Trump's administration, which is really saying a lot. But it's not just us saying that. It is his own staffers. We have consistently seen reports in the past couple of weeks after Hegseth either fired or saw all his staff quit that no one wants to work for him. No one wants to work for him. And the people who do work for him, yeah, they don't want to work for him either. It's just so bad. And that was detailed in this new report leaking just how bad things are at the Pentagon. We're screwed. Pentagon insiders brought close to tears by Hegseth failures. More than a dozen insiders spilled new details about the leadership void within the Department of Defense, which they say has been brought to the brink of collapse by Donald Trump's choice for secretary. Of course, Trump tapped former Fox News host Pete Hegseth as the military's civilian leader, despite having no relevant experience leading a massive bureaucracy, and his brief tenure so far has been marked with scandal, leaks, infighting, and surprising dismissals, all of which inside sources told New York Magazine had undercut U.S. national security at an alarming scale. Pete is playing secretary, source told the magazine. He's not being secretary. The source specifically cited Israel bombing Iran, which actually happened hours before the report was published online, as the type of crisis Hegseth wasn't qualified to handle. For any substantial operations, we're screwed, the source said. There's nobody in the SecDef's office at this point that has any. They're not heavyweights. They don't have the sophistication. They don't have the experience. Another source described how a veteran Pentagon employee was close to tears discussing the lack of readiness in the defense secretary's office. The department is so effed, the employee said, according to the source. Hegseth immediately set to work on the parts of the job he liked most, working out, posting photos of himself, working out with the troops, and talking about purging the military of trans service members, and quickly falling into the grips of paranoia about leaks and disloyalty, according to insiders. The leaks seemed to come as fast as we had meetings in the building, said one of the more than a dozen sources with close knowledge of Hegseth's tenure. Hegseth chose a fellow bureau vet, Joe Casper, as his first chief of staff and put him in charge of investigating the leaks, but he frequently rubbed colleagues the wrong way. I knew he was a moron within 30 seconds of meeting him, said Colin Carroll, who worked as deputy secretary of Steve Feinberg's chief of staff. Carroll was among the three top officials, along with the deputy chief of staff, Darren Selknick, and senior advisor Dan Caldwell, who were abruptly fired April 15th after they were accused of leaking, although no evidence of that has emerged, and he offered a scathing assessment of Hegseth's handling of the matter. What this report with leaks from inside sources continues to prove out about the Pentagon is that the focus from Trump and Hegseth is on loyalty above all else. And we saw this at the screening of soldiers that took place at Fort Bragg, checking political identity and physical appearance for who could stand behind Donald Trump. So he had a cheering crowd as he goaded them into booing Gavin Newsom, Mayor Bass, and just a disgusting display. That's what Donald Trump wants. Loyalty to himself and his agenda above all else. And he doesn't care who gets in his way. And clearly, neither does Pete Hegseth, because Congressman Ro Khanna asked him about abiding by court decisions, something becoming increasingly important as Donald Trump sicks the National Guard and Marines on L.A. Take a listen to what Pete Hegseth had to say.
Senator Baldwin asked you about the legal authority for the Marines in my state. I disagree with you. I thought not only do I not want Marines in Iran, I don't want them in California. But I don't want to get a gotcha. You know, they said, what provision? Your administration since then has filed in the federal district court. You're arguing that the Marines should be allowed to defend federal property. I disagree with you. That's your argument. Here's where I hope we can agree. Whatever the federal district court decides, will you abide by it?
Well, this is a pending situation.
So will you agree, though, that it's not my legal view, it's not your legal view that makes the decision in America. It's the federal judiciary. If the federal court in California and the San Francisco this district judge has orders a preliminary injunction, will you agree to abide by the federal courts?
What I will tell you is my job right now is to ensure the troops that we have in Los Angeles are capable of supporting law enforcement in there.
Sir, I agree with that, but will you?
And we know we have the constitutional and
even,
statutory authority.
That's fine, but can you just assure us that you'll abide by the decisions of the courts?
We've always looked at the decisions of the courts.
Well, the vice president has said that he doesn't believe that the courts should be respected in military matters.
Well, this is not my lane, but we also recognize that the way in which the judiciary has expanded its powers.
But can you just give a simple? Okay, let me ask you this: two simple questions. You got 30 seconds. I'm not trying to trick you. I think it would assure the American people. Because it shouldn't be Ro Khanna's view of the Constitution, and it shouldn't be Secretary Hegseth's. It should be the Supreme Court and the federal courts. Can you assure the American people on two things? You will respect any Supreme Court decision on this matter about whether the Marines are constitutional, and you will respect the district courts when they rule before the Supreme Court rules.
What I can say is we should not have local judges determining foreign policy or national security policy for the country.
So you're not willing to say you would respect those decisions?
What I'm saying is local district Judges shouldn't make foreign policy for the United States.
In addition, in an incredibly disturbing incident, there was a pop-up shop selling MAGA merchandise on post at Fort Bragg. And to summarize this, there was a commander from Bragg who said on the record, quote, "This has been a bad week for the Army, for anyone who cares about us being a neutral institution. This was shameful." If those are the facts, and I know the Army is investigating at least the MAGA pop-up shop, is that appropriate, General Kane?
Sir, I haven't seen any of these reports. I'm not familiar with them, but as I mentioned earlier and in my confirmation hearing, the nation demands a apolitical, nonpartisan military.
I appreciate you saying that and happy to share those reports. Secretary Hegseth, are you familiar with DoD Directive 1344.10? Political activities of the members of the armed forces?
First off, I don't buy into your
yes or no?
insinuation
Are you familiar
that pledges
with,
are being done under this administration. That's
I reclaim my
insinuation.
time. Are you familiar with this DoD directive?
There's never one time in my service or in this
Mr.
Defense
Secretary,
Department.
will you please answer
I'm answering your
these
question
questions?
where politics has been considered for service members.
Are you familiar with this directive? Yes or no?
Which directive?
DoD Directive 1344.10. I'm happy to provide you a copy. There's even a one-page red and green cheat sheet. Are you familiar with it? This is the same directive from when we were all in uniform.
I'm sure I am.
Has anything changed in that directive under your guidance, given what happened 2 days ago at Fort Bragg? Is there a new policy change that we're not aware of?
Again, I totally reject your insinuation.
Is there a policy change to DoD Directive 1344.10?
I know what you're attempting to insinuate, but there's
I'll
no
take that as a
policy
no.
change and there is no policy.
Mr. Secretary, have you ever worn a MAGA hat in front of the troops?
I own plenty of MAGA hats, but I don't.
Have you
know
ever
that I
worn
have.
one in front of the troops at an official event? I don't
I'm
believe
aware
so.
of.
I don't believe so. Do you think it's appropriate for the President of the United States to wear political merchandise, including a MAGA hat, at official events, including West Point commencement?
The Commander-in-Chief
Yes or no?
can wear whatever hat he wants, to include the phrase, "Make America Great Again," because I would like to
you
make
think
America
that's-
great again as well.
So you think that's appropriate?
The Commander-in-Chief has the right, in front of his troops, to wear whatever he'd like.
Okay, I strongly disagree with you. And I urge you both, especially you, General Kane, as we see an increasingly political rhetoric, including from the Secretary.
It is no surprise that this administration, above all else, is focused on loyalty, but the way that they are using it is incredibly scary, and it makes it important for us to identify and call it out. We are going to be doing so on this show every single day, and if you want to support that, as always, you can hit that subscribe button, leave a like on this video, and if you stuck around at the end, drop a blue heart in the comments. And until next time, I'll see you soon.